This Pheldagrif commander deck is one of the most powerful decks that you can add to your commander arsenal. It's a group hug strategy that boasts a really high power level, but is very adaptive to any group that you need it to be. There's a lot of replacement options, a lot of more budget options as well, and a lot of the cards that you're going to see in the deck list in the link down below on Moxfield, you're going to see that they're just leftover cards from constructed cards that I've had, and there's a lot of additions that you can make. It's a card that really boasts control and kingmaking. You can choose who you want to win the game or how they want to win it, but ultimately, if you don't want them to win, then you can win at any point. It's one of those casual commander decks that your opponents love you for playing, and then ultimately, if you play it the right way, you can just be that low-key player that wins whenever they want, but under the guise of, I'm trying to help you too. So Pheldagrif, 1 green, white, and blue legendary creature. Pheldagrif green, you can activate for 1 green. Pheldagrif gains trample, and then target opponent gains a 1/1 green hippo creature token into play. You can activate for 1 white, and Pheldagrif gains flying, and then target opponent gains 2 life, and then activate for 1 blue. Return the Pheldagrif to your hand. Target opponent may draw a card. So unfortunately, not a lot of great options for infinite mana. Obviously, you can help your opponent out with some blockers. You can gain a bunch of life for them, and then the may draw card is kind of unfortunate. You'd probably just build a bunch of infinite mana engines, and activate that a bunch of times. But again, Pheldagrif, a lot of great options here. Now, if you want to see more commander deck text like this, especially commanders that I play, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Comment down below what you want to see next. I know there's a lot of folks wanting to get out my Mothman deck out there. If you want to see that deck tech, I got to hear it in the comment section down below. All right, leave a like on the video. Let's talk about the deck list itself, starting off with the Planeswalkers. Now, a lot of the cards that I want to talk about, I may not talk about the whole card. I want to talk about their purpose in the deck, and I think that's going to be the value that you're going to get out of this deck. And really what you have to know is there is a big mill component when it comes to the win conditions in this deck. But starting off with Dovin Bond, that might not be so obvious. Really what you're using this for is it's +1, where you're able to shut off a creature, stop its activated abilities. They can't be activated, power it down a bit. And what's great is if that opponent tries to stop you, you've done something good. And with the nature of group hug, obviously politicking is going to be a little bit easier for you. Those 2 other players in your pod, whatever how many players there are going to be more likely to help you shut that creature off. Dovin Bond for its +1 is great. You get some draw, and then your opponent can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap step if you get to its ultimate. Elspeth Sun's Champion is here for its board wipe. It's a board wipe that sticks around. Essentially, you get to board wipe all the problematic things, and then your opponent may have to use a swing to like swing into you with that. And then the +1 can protect itself. The -7 is like a cool overrun effect, but really you're using this for its board wipe, and then just having it be this beacon of sticking around where it could happen in the future. Garruk Primal Hunter is not only a token generator, but you're using this for its draw effect. There's a lot of cards or effects in here that can create some big creatures for you, and so Garruk is going to be a great option in the late game to draw into some other effects. There's going to be a lot of spells in this deck that you want to draw into, a lot of win conditions that you need to draw into. You want options, you want more resources. Garruk helps you with that. Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, are one of the more replaceable Planeswalkers in this deck. You're really using this just for some value, and it being a blue card, which is going to matter for some of the later cards. But again, just another card that's really just low-key value. Not a lot of players are going to swing into it. Its ultimate's really hard to get to. You're probably not even going to use it if you're being the group hug player, but of course, if you need to pivot, all of a sudden you can ultimate and get there. Jace the Mind Sculptor, constructed legend right here. Really what you're using this for is the Brainstorm and the value. A lot of cards that you draw in this deck are curated around selection. You're going to draw a lot of raw cards, so having that selection is going to be very important to filter that through. That Brainstorm effect is going to be great to draw 3 cards, put in the back, maybe you shuffle those cards away. But that's what you're really using that for. Jace Balerion, that +2 is what you're using this for. Each player draws a card. Obviously, if you get to that situation where it gets to 10, you can mill someone out, or you can mill someone over to help a reanimator player. Again, you get to choose who you want to win the game. Jace Wielder Mysteries is one of the primary win conditions in this deck if you want to pivot. Blue 1. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. And then +1, target player mills 2 cards, you draw a card, and then -8, draw 7 cards. Then if your library has no cards in it, you win the game. And so Jace Wielder Mysteries, just fantastic card in general. I will note right now off the bit that I'm purposefully not playing Thassa's Oracle, because Thassa's Oracle I found like a little too easy of a win condition. You can obviously argue that some of the other win conditions we're going to go into are maybe just as easy or equal, but I find it being a creature and an ETB effect it's just a little too hard to interact with in certain pods, and it might just be too easy, and it might put too much of a target on your back in future games. So I purposely don't include Thassa's Oracle with card like Jace Wielder Mysteries. This is a Planeswalker. It's a non-creature spell. There's a lot of ways to interact with this, attack in, and stop this card. Kiora, the Crashing Wave, you're primarily using this for its playing an additional land effect. This +1 effect is actually really powerful, preventing damage from and to a certain creature, just kind of locking that creature down. But that play an additional land is really powerful, because I found that if you want to pivot in this game and win the game, you need more lands than your opponent. And I think that's just an adage of all Commander games. You just generally want more lands than your opponent, more resources than your opponent. So that plain additional land is really powerful, and I will always just keep minusing. Even though it's at 2, I will definitely just minus and destroy this just to play 2 additional lands. That's so powerful and puts you so far ahead. Nissa Vital Force is another one where you get to untap a land and becomes a 5/5, just creating a big creature that could combo with the Garruk Primal Hunter that we were talking about. But again, just untapping a creature, it's still a land, and then you can return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, recur a Planeswalker, you can recur that Jace that we were talking about, and then that emblem that says, which is actually really easy to get to, and I've gotten off a couple times, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Great combo with the Kiora Crashing Waves, or just when it enters the battlefield under your control in general. This could be through other ramp spells that we're playing in the deck. You're just gonna be drawing many cards. Drawing cards is gonna be important here, getting more resources, getting more lands. This allowing you to untap and just creating threats. Just a pretty powerful Planeswalker, but again, could be pretty replaceable. Let's hop right into the creatures themselves, starting off first with Champions of Minas Tirith. And the reason I like this card is because what it does is it introduces the Monarch into the game. And what you do is you just almost openly give the Monarch away and let the other players in the pod quarrel over it. You introduce it, and that's why there's not a lot of ways to really get it back, but you use this as an introduction piece, and then the other players can start swinging at each other and fighting over it, and you're just sitting in the background. They're getting those passive cards, but it's more about a politicking tool. So they get the Monarch, they're attacking each other, they're mad at each other, they're trying to fight over this card resources. You're giving them all the resources they need. Champions of Minas Tirith is a great way to do that. Eternal Witness, just a staple good green card, returning any card from the graveyard to your hand, no restriction whatsoever. This is a great card to just return not only win conditions, but just value things like ramp. If you just need certain ramp cards out, again, more lands in this deck is really powerful. There's a lot of cards that you want to cast in succession, so it's important to do that. Fiend Hunter, just a removal spell against one of the more replaceable cards in this deck. Definitely just, you know, if you want to up the power of your deck or just change up some of the options, Fiend Hunter is a great replacement, especially if you wanted to play Thassa's Oracle. This is one of the cards that you're looking to replace for Thoracle. In terms of Thoracle, Laboratory Maniac is, of course, in the deck. This is going to be a mill win condition deck. This is my flavor of it. You're on a channel called That Mill Guy. I'm going to use Labman as a self-mill win condition here. So very obvious what this is for. You can empty your deck out pretty obviously and pretty efficiently by drawing a bunch of cards, exiling your cards, and some of the other cards that we're going to mention later. Null Mage Advocate is a fantastic card. You can tap this to destroy target artifact or enchantment, but you return cards from an opponent's graveyard to their hand. So you can essentially make a deal and be like, okay, I'm going to destroy your problematic artifact, but I'm going to give you 2 cards back, right? So they get the return first, then you destroy it, so that kind of sequencing is good there. Or you can make deals where, okay, I'm going to destroy that artifact that's stopping you, and then you, player A, are going to have to destroy player B's thing that's stopping me. So it's a great politicking tool to be like, I'm going to give you some cards back to then kill this thing, but then you have to promise this. Null Mage Advocate is a great politicking tool. Then Scavenging Ooze, just a great value card in general, a little bit of grave hate. It can gain you some life as well. This is a great one where, you know, you can be like, hey, I just need to gain some life. Can I exile that creature? You have no recursion. Or, hey, you're doing a little too much. You said you wouldn't. I'm going to Scavenging Ooze it. Silent Arbiter also helps like slow the game down a little bit. And what I like about Silent Arbiter is no more than one creature can attack or block, but it's a creature and an artifact which is very interactable with. I just tell my opponents, hey, this is just here to block around. If you can't kill it, that's kind of your fault. Like, this is a creature, it's got a power toughness, and it's an artifact. Some of the most interactable types in the game. So I purposefully kind of play this Silent Arbiter as a creature. Solemn, just again, land ramp is key in this deck. You definitely, I think this deck could incorporate more land ramp, but Solemn just being that is great. Sad Robot is key. And this is where some of the more powerful upgrades I've included from my constructed play. Subtlety is in here because it's not a hard counter spell, but it's a counter spell that returns a planeswalker or creature to its owner's hand, to their deck, and they can choose to use it, put it on top, or put it at the bottom, or do what they need to do, and it's free. So this is one of those pivot when you want to. Your opponent's about to go off, you subtlety their win condition, and then you untap and you kind of take it from there. So this is kind of why I wanted to include a lot more blue spells in this deck, especially if you're playing out a lot of ramp. It doesn't necessarily matter that it's free. You probably just have the mana to cast it anyway, but subtlety is kind of important for that pivot. Now, in terms of sorceries, now I'm going to kind of leave the win condition one last. So let's talk about Windfall. Windfall, blue and 2, sorcery. Each player discards their hand, draws cards equal to the greatest. This is going to be just a great way to, again, refill your hand. Your opponent's going to be drawing a bunch of cards, and all of a sudden, once they start getting low on cards, Windfall could potentially be a win condition. But it's also just a great way to, once you Cyclonic Rift, which is coming, by the way, Cyclonic Rift plus Windfall is a very evil way to kind of quote unquote soft wipe the board. Next up is Ponder. Simple draw card. Draw your cards, shuffle things away, whatever you need to do, especially if you're bottom decking some cards, your opponent's doing that to you. Shuffling things away could be very powerful. Supreme Verdict, just an uncounterable board wipe. If you need to control the game, you need to make sure your board wipes are kind of protected in that sense. Verdict's great. Time Wipe is a great one because if you need to save a certain creature that you have that you want to play later on, maybe it is a Laboratory Maniac, Time Wipe is a great way to kind of solve that, but is very replaceable with other options if you want other board wipes, other ramp, whatever it is. Fractured Identity, one of the more latest additions to this deck that I've included. Exile target non-land permanent. Each player other than its controller creates a token copy of it. So this is a great way to just be like, okay, you're going to lose control of that creature because you're going way too far with it, and now everyone else is going to gain control of it. Or maybe you want to give them control of something that you have. And so that's how Fractured Sanity is just going to be a great removal spell. Farewell, I mean, this is one of the more saltier cards that exist in the format. So many casual players call for a ban. You know what it does? Just exiles everything. Explosive Vegetation. The cards that I wish I had more copies of, and cards I wish I could always have in my opening hand, Explosive Vegetation is one of them. So this card is absolutely fantastic and just one of the better options that you have for ramp. It's going to be really important to get those kind of basics out. Cultivate, just again, another great basic ramp card. Call of the Gatewatch, because we're taking a pretty heavy Planeswalker theme, I can include this, but if you wanted to reduce the cost of the deck, because some of these Planeswalkers might be more expensive, and just really go into different win conditions, Call the Gatewatch is one of the more replaceable cards, but I really like this as an option because it searches for your Jace. Again, if you want to pivot to a win condition, if you need to search for value or you need to search for win, you have that with Call. And then finally, Approach the Second Sun is the last sorcery to be a win condition, because you can cast this, and a lot of times, because you're drawing so many cards, you will just find this again. Like truly, like, you have the ability to draw through so much of your deck, you will just find this card again. And so casting it a second time is great. The great thing about Approach the Second Sun is also if your opponent returns it to your hand, or you have effects that you want to add to the deck that return this to your hand, I believe the way this works is Approach the Second Sun, you cast it, and then it doesn't matter if it resolved, you can cast it, bounce it to your hand, and then cast it again, and then you win. So if you have enough mana, you can make that happen as a win condition. Now, going on to the instance, Brainstorm, very simple. Selection is key after all your card draw. Beast Within, just as a bit of targeted removal, creating green 3/3 beast. Very group hug because you get to replace something. An Offer You Can't Refuse is another great one too, where you get to counter a non-creature spell, but then also its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. So it's like, hey, you don't get your win condition, but here's a bit more mana just to replace that. Enlightened Tutor as a great way to just grab artifacts. There are some enchantments. There's some enchantments in here that are, again, value enchantments and also win conditions. We're going to get into those as well. Delay as a counter spell is great because essentially it counters a spell, but then they get to cast it eventually. So that's what I tell people. Essentially, it's control, but it says, I don't want you to win the game right now. I don't want you to do that right now, but you can do it eventually. That's what I like about Delay. Cyclonic Rift, classic card. Control decks, play it. Force of Will is in here as one of the more replaceable cards. Definitely expensive. I have it for my constructed play. Force of Will, just, again, a free counterspell that you can use to pivot. A lot of times this is just pretty much, I'm trying to win the game. Let me have it, right? Y'all took too long. I gave you all this card draw, all this ramp. Let me win the game. Heroic Intervention, just, again, another protection spell. I didn't want to lose the game right now. This game needs to go on a little longer. Let's protect myself. Crossing Grip as a great way to just deal with a really problematic thing. This just running away with the game a little too ridiculously. Split Decision is nice because then what happens is you can counter a spell based on votes, or you can duplicate it and copy the spell. So your opponent has to choose. If the spell is ridiculous, they need to counter it. Or if they don't think so, then you can potentially get a duplicate out of it with some politicking. Path to Exile, exiling a creature, they look for a basic land, basic group hug stuff, Oblation as well. You shuffle a non-land permanent back into their deck, and then what happens is they draw 2 cards, so they could very much draw the card again, but they kind of lose the permanent and they get some cards back. So I love Oblation in group hug decks. Swords to Plowshare, another piece of targeted removal. I love white for targeted removal. You need to be playing more of these in your commander decks. Vision Skins, very simple. Each player draws 2 cards. Words of Wisdom is another one of those, you draw 2 cards, everyone draws a card as well. And then finally, Worldly Tutor as an option to search. So consistency is key in this deck, especially being a higher power level deck. Worldly Tutor is going to be very important to tutor these up. But again, if you wanted to power this down, cards like this are very replaceable, especially if you wanted to go more budget route. This card can be relatively expensive. Let's talk about the artifacts. Arcane Signet, piece of ramp, very simple. Chromatic Lantern, because you have a lot of like high kind of devotion heavy cards like that cost like blue, white, and then green. And so if you want to be able to cast these effectively, Chromatic Lantern is important. Commander Sphere, just the ability to draw a card at instant speed is very important. If you empty your deck with some of the cards we're going to talk about in a sec, especially with the lab man out, something like this on a stick is really powerful to just be able to draw a card. Helm Awakening is like a chaotic effect. All spells cost 1 generic less. Your soul rings are free. Some of your artifacts cost like much less, but this is a very chaotic card. Just be very aware that if you play Helm of Awakening, chances are that circle of the turn either is like game ending, like pretty much like you've halved the length of the game by playing a card like this. And so you better be okay with your opponents winning the game or potentially you getting more value out of it. Gilded Lotus as more pieces of ramp, just getting more ramp out there. There definitely are some other options, but this is the one I just kind of have in my collection. Ensnaring Bridge as an option to prevent combat. So if you're trying to win the game and you start getting into the prison realm, you can play some Ensnaring Bridge. A very replaceable card if you wanted to go more group hug. You want to play this less. You don't want to really go prison. Horn of Greed is a great card. When there's an enchantment that we're going to play, we're going to discuss in a second, where your opponents can play more lands per turn. Horn of Greed is a great way to take advantage of that. When they play a land, they draw a card, then they might draw into more lands. They play those, they draw more cards. Horn of Greed is great. Soul Ring, staple, Temple Garden, each player draws a card. A lot of these draw effects start to get really ridiculous with one enchantment that we're going to talk about in white. But Temple Bell, each player draws a card. And then the One Ring is in here because, again, higher power deck. If you need to protect yourself for that turn cycle, just so you can draw into something and just keep yourself alive, the One Ring is around from my constructed decks as well. I just have a copy of this. Just a very powerful commander card, very replaceable for budget purposes, and if you wanted to power down your deck. Now, enchantments are where we started getting into a lot of the win conditions, a lot of the ridiculous stuff. So Dictate of Karametra. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, that player adds 1 mana to their mana pool of any type that land would produce. So this card has flash too. You can flash it in at any time. If you want to be resentful and petty, you can flash it in at everyone's end step and then go to your turn and untap, use more mana. Or you can use it early and then you double up. Maybe you're working with the opponent. You say, okay, I can double up your mana if you destroy this thing. I can give you more mana if you counter that spell. And so Dictate is a great way to kind of use that because it has flash. Dictate of Crewfix, another card that has flash. The beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an additional card. Again, more card draw is going to be really powerful for what we're going to talk about in a second here. Ghostly Prison as another protection piece. This is very similar to Propaganda as well, just analogs of each other. They do the same thing. You don't necessarily need to play these if you aren't worried about protecting yourself. You could just be playing more board wipes. But I like this because I'm playing the Enlightened Tutor, so I can tutor into these effects if I need to protect myself. Mystic Remora, just blue card draw, similar to Rhystic Study as well. Just again, staples of the deck. Then Rites of Flourishing, at the beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an additional card. Each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. So again, more effects that double up mana, but also each player, it doubles you up too. It's not just your opponent. You want to make sure the group hug effects that you're playing also allow you to double up on the effects. But let's hop into some win conditions. Firstly, I want to talk about Smothering Tide. Notice how your opponent's drawing a bunch of cards. Let's say you have the Rite of Flourishing out. Let's say you have some other effects out, like the Dictate of Crewfix. Are they going to be able to pay for all of those effects just to prevent you from getting treasure tokens? Imagine playing Smothering Tide and then Windfall. It's just absolutely nuts. This is the card that allows you to pivot and win. You are going to have so much mana that your opponents are not going to be able to keep up. Smothering Tide is one of the key tutors that one of the key cards I tutor with in Enlightened Tutor. one of the best cards in this deck. Once you have the Group Hug engine going and you want to pivot, Smothering Tide is the step forward for that. Next up, I want to talk about Thought Lash, actually. So blue and 2. This is a strange one. This is a really niche one. Cumulative upkeep, remove the top card of your library from the game. If you don't, remove your library from the game and bury Thought Lash. So this is a great way to just instantly remove your deck. And then also 0, activate this for free, remove the top card of your library from the game to prevent 1 damage to you. So to prevent the next one, you can activate this as many times as you want to exile your whole deck. And this is going to be a great way to win with stuff like Thassa's Oracle if you want to include it, stuff like Jace Wielder of Mysteries if you want to include it. And then of course, if you have a Laboratory Maniac out, you exile your whole deck. If you have a 1-draw effect, which there's a ton of in this game, like a Temple Bell or an activation of a Commander Sphere, Thought Lash is your win condition kind of with that if you have a Lab Man out. So again, one of those pivot pieces, and again, it's an enchantment that you can tutor with Enlightened Tutor. Finally, the last card that I love in Group Hug, in all blue-based Group Hug decks, Force Fruition. This is a staple. You need this card, and it's so cheap too. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player draws 7 cards. That is forced. That's not you. Whenever they cast any spell, they need to be drawing 7 cards. This gets ridiculous really quick. Your opponents essentially have to win the game on the spot somehow, or any spell they cast is going to start reducing their deck significantly in terms of percentages. Force Fruition gets ridiculous, especially if you've managed to just Smothering Time and outvalue your opponents through the game. Force Fruition is just going to force them to draw a bunch of cards they can't cast, but you're going to have a lot of options through the cards that you've drawn and kind of maximizing your hand size. Force Fruition, classic. Let's hop right into the final section, the lands themselves. For Azorius Chancery, Bounce Land, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Glacial Chasm is a card that I do want to mention as a way to protect yourself as well. I'm not playing any land tutors in here because I'd rather these come organically. I'm not playing any fetches either for budget considerations, but you definitely could power up this deck very much. 3 basic forests, Glacial Forest, Harbor, Hedge Maze, Hallowed Fountain, Islands. Maze of Faith is another way to prevent combat damage from something, and this can protect everybody. Meticulous Archive, Pit of Offering, Painted Bluffs. Miki Koro is a great way for each player to draw a card as well. This is another each player effect, so you get to draw cards as well. 3 Plains, Port Town, Prairie Stream, Seaside Citadel, Reliquary Tower to prevent your hand side, like make sure you have no maximum hand side. Spring, Sanctuary, Skycloud Expanse, Temple Garden, Terramorphic Expanse, Yavimaya Coast, Throne of the High City as a way to become the monarch again, introduce it into the game, and then just let your opponents go wild. Temple of the False God to ramp out, and Temple of Mystery. So again, this is the deck itself. There's so many options that you have in this deck. There's so many cards that are replaceable, but you can start to see how things start getting really ridiculous when you introduce some engines, start drawing some cards, start ramping out. This is a very low-key deck, but once you have your pieces out, all of a sudden your opponent's going to realize, wow, they're drawing a bunch of cards, they have a bunch of mana, what do we do about them? And you're like, nothing. I have all the answers in the world. I'm Group Hug. Y'all didn't want to win soon enough. I'm going to win now. One of the best decks that I have, one of my favorite decks to pilot because of the directions and again the king making that you can do with it. But again, let me know what you think about the deck list down below. What are your favorite inclusions in Group Hug decks? Do you have a Pheldragrif deck? I'd love to see your deck list and get some ideas, and obviously, you know, we swap some deck lists here. You got mine on the screen and in the description down below. Let's hear about it. But yeah, if you want to see the Mothman deck as well, I gotta hear those comments down below. Leave a like on the video. I want to see this video do well for future deck techs coming to the channel.